When I set out this morning, I didn't really have any intention to make a video today. I don't need a day off, I just hadn't thought of anything to talk about. But then I was walking through a piece of the wood I'd never been in before. It went off to the left. I took that path rather than my normal path, and it took me into a valley, and it was quite a dense, very green valley. And as I was coming out of it, I saw something over to my right. It was a glint of light, and I stopped, and I went off the path and went through the ferns, and on the ground was it just looks like a tombstone. Here it is here, look, it just looks like a tombstone. So I thought, oh, it was a bit incongruous because we're literally in the middle of a forest and here's a tombstone. There was nothing written on it, and it was too heavy for me to turn over. So I suspect it is a monument to someone, or perhaps a beloved animal or something. But that got my brain going, and I started to think about, well, obviously grief. And what's that got to do with organisations? Well, I'm not going to go down the loss of a loved one type of grief, but there is another type of grief that I've rarely thought about, if I'm absolutely honest, and that's where someone has to leave a company, or where the company has to cease to exist. And unfortunately at the moment this is going to be a reality for, I suspect, millions of people over the next 6 months to 18 months to 2 years. I don't know how long it's going to happen, that the economy is going to have to reset after the COVID pandemic. Now, as a former HR professional, I had my fair share of letting people go, from the ridiculous where people were stealing from the business, to the very sad where product lines just weren't working and we had to cut the cloth accordingly. And like any other HR guy, I had employee assistance programs, I had redeployment schemes, we had retraining grants, and all that sort of good basic HR policy stuff. But it struck me as I was walking out of that valley that rarely did I ever think about it from the impact it had on the human being in the moment and in the longer term. From personal experience, and most of us have these experiences, it's a rare career that is continuous without periods of grief. And on reflection, on a couple of occasions, I mean, I was desperately upset. I mean, it was a type of trauma, and no one really helps you through that apart from your partner or your friends, but the company doesn't. And here we are on the edge of a period where lots of people are going to be experiencing this. So what have I got to say to them and to organisations, these organisations that are moving into this new future? Well, the company bit is probably easier, in that I think companies have to build on what they've offered to this point, to think about the issues that are in the tissues, as Jamie Whale said, of those individuals who are leaving their work or losing their job, or the whole company's closing down. But as an individual, it's a different type of challenge. I mean, I used to say, I think to myself, I don't think I ever, probably did voice it sometimes, but it's interesting whenever you're involved in things like redundancy programs. It's very consistent in my experience that people emerge from those redundancy programs stronger, often at a higher level in their next job, often with the financial freedom to perhaps do what they wanted to do and become a company founder themselves. So there is often a very positive outcome, and that isn't trivial. That is worth remembering. But there's another thing that I've only really realised in hindsight, which is often the way with things involving us complex human creatures. Trauma sits with us intellectually and physically. The poet Gregory Orr talking about this, and what he said was, and he was quoting someone else, but what he said was, sorrow or any trauma can be born if a story can emerge from it, if you can tell the story of that trauma. Now that's a fairly powerful thing, and I've seen friends of mine who have been through horrific, life-changing, traumatic experiences, Madeline here being one of them. And I have to confess that I wasn't sure how I felt about them sharing those stories and whether it did them any good to this point. But on reflection, and given what Gregory said about trauma can be born if a story can be told of it, and then reflecting back on my own experiences of leaving companies or having to leave companies, I think I can see what people like Madeline are doing now in a much clearer light. So for example, one of the most awful experiences in my career was where I was working for a British utility company called British Gas. And it's fair to say we loved it. I mean, we all did. I mean, it was the best company to work for. It was the best customer service provider in the UK. It was the best gas company in Europe. We had an incredible welfare system. We were well paid. We had good bonuses. We had, everything was good. There was the usual internal politics and all the rest of it, but everything was pretty good, and the commitment to training was unbelievable. It was massively powerful, and we all, I guess, fell in love with that company. But then the company, and it's a long story, but the company was then broken up. It was, in effect, it was privatised. And we were asked to help privatise the company, and then the majority of us were given options to stay or to go. And I was in the situation where I was living in Cheshire, which is a part of the north west of England, and my partner and I didn't want to move, and they offered me a role in Solihull, which is further south, and we decided that it was time to leave. I remember walking out the gates of the offices in Altrincham in tears. I didn't want to leave. I can feel my emotions coming up now. Isn't that weird? About a company, this happened literally decades ago now. But now I can reframe that, and I think I can now explain why I tell stories about it when I'm speaking publicly and when I'm on podcasts, etc. So you remember the words that Gregory Orr quoted. Trauma can be born if a story can be told about it. Remember that if you're about to face a period of uncertainty, when either your baby, your company of which you're founder, or the company to which you have given 10 years of your wild and precious life has just asked you to leave.